AITA for pressing charges after my mom secretly sold my condo to fund my brother? My name is Natalie, and this story began when I was a little girl, about 5 or 6 years old. My parents separated, and at that time I did not understand much. I just felt like my whole world was being torn apart. My dad's name is Michael. He put up with what he could. My mom, Diane, had been pressuring him about money for years. You do not make enough. We cannot live like this. You are not providing. It was not an occasional complaint. It was how she spoke to him, constantly judging him and finding him lacking. I remember one afternoon perfectly. My dad came home excited with a smile I rarely saw on his face. He had news of a promotion. It did not make him wealthy, but to him it was a real achievement earned through hard work. He walked into the living room and said, "I got the position. See, it is possible." My mom did not even stand up. She looked him up and down and said very flatly, "That is all? I thought you were finally going to land a real job." His face fell. Truly fell. As if someone had flipped a switch inside him. He barely spoke that night, and shortly afterward he moved out of the house. Back then I experienced it as abandonment. It hurt deeply. I felt small and lost. But now that I am older and looking at it calmly, I understand why he left. I do not excuse everything, but I do understand that he had reached his breaking point. Diane, on the other hand, saw an opportunity in the situation. She quickly realized that playing the struggling single mother opened doors for her at work in an office building on Wilshire Boulevard in downtown Los Angeles. She would arrive late and make a whole scene. "Oh, Mr. Thompson, please forgive me. Natalie woke up sick and I do not have anyone to help me," she would say with a trembling voice, as if she were going to cry at any moment. And her boss, being a very kind man, would reply, "Do not worry, Diane. The important thing is your little girl." Meanwhile, I was perfectly fine at home watching cartoons, because my mom had spent longer doing her hair and makeup than dealing with whatever illness she had invented for me. Family gatherings were the worst. At Christmas, on birthdays, at Sunday dinners with my aunts, Diane would sit like royalty in the living room and tell her story in great detail, as if giving a speech. Michael left us with nothing. Imagine me here raising my little girl the best I can. And everyone would chime in. "Oh, you poor thing. What a terrible man. How can people be like that?" I would shrink in my chair, my face burning because I knew it was a lie, but I would not dare say anything. At that age I already understood that you do not contradict my mother in public or in private. The truth, which no one knew, was that my dad did send child support every month. Sometimes it arrived by direct deposit, sometimes by check. And he would let her know, so there were no excuses. My mom would mock him. When the statement arrived, she would wave it in front of me as if it were a joke. "Look, Natalie," she would say, "your dad thinks that small amount is enough to raise a child. What a disgrace." I had no idea how much it was supposed to be. I only knew that it put her in a bad mood. And when Diane was in a bad mood, my life became complicated. Everything felt heavier, colder, and more tense. Over the years I began to notice something that gave me chills. My mom would stare at me as if evaluating me, and suddenly she would narrow her eyes as if she saw something she did not like. Later I understood. I looked a lot like my dad. The same face shape, the same smile, and that brought back memories for her, but not good ones. Even so, she kept me close because I was useful to her. The image of a single mom fighting with her little girl by her side was perfect. It made people feel sorry for her. It got her special treatment, even some financial help here and there, and she knew how to use that better than anyone. But when I was about 10 years old, everything changed again. Diane met Paul. Paul was successful. One of those men who are always busy, always on a call, always with a full schedule. And with him my mom lost the appeal of being poor and abandoned. Now she wanted a different picture to show the world. The perfect wife of an important man. And to be honest, I was in the way. It started with little things, but things that break you inside. Suddenly she would forget to wash my school uniform. I would go to school in wrinkled, stained clothes that smelled of dampness. I was so embarrassed that I would change quickly in the bathroom stall and pray that no one would say anything. Of course they did. Kids notice everything and they whisper and laugh. Then came the food situation. Diane cooked for herself and Paul as if it were a restaurant. The house smelled delicious, but when I sat down at the table she would look annoyed. "Oh, Natalie, sorry, I did not make enough for 3. She would say as if it were the most normal thing. "Make yourself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich." I would go to the kitchen with my stomach growling and put together something quick, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or some cereal, whatever was there. And from the kitchen I would hear Diane and Paul talking, laughing, the sound of silverware, the clinking of glasses. That difference hit me like a slap in the face. It was not just hunger, it was feeling like I did not matter. The worst was when she started interfering with my homework. I would stay up late doing assignments, writing carefully, gluing things, printing at the copy store, and the next day they were gone. They disappeared. I would search frantically, open drawers, check my backpack, and nothing. I arrived in class empty-handed, stuttering excuses to the teacher. My grades dropped. The teachers looked at me with that look of something is happening at home, and I just swallowed it all because I did not know how to explain it without feeling ashamed and afraid. Paul, meanwhile, seemed to live in another dimension. He spent his time working, and when he did not, his attention was solely on Diane. She stuck to him like glue. "Paul, sit down already. You work too much," she would say, rubbing his shoulders. "I swear I do not know what I would do without you." And he, delighted, would reply, "What would I do without you, Diane?" I watched them from afar and felt invisible. Everything got even worse when my mom announced she was pregnant. Paul was as happy as a kid with a new toy. And Diane took advantage of that to become untouchable. "The doctor says I have to rest," she would tell me, lying on the couch. "Do me a favor and tidy up the house." I would get home from school and start cleaning, sweeping, washing dishes while she slept or talked on the phone with her friends. When Paul arrived, Diane would get up slowly with one hand on her belly, acting as if she were carrying the weight of the world. "Oh, my love, I am exhausted," she would sigh. "Creating life is really heavy work." Paul would rush to help her. "Sit down, my love. Natalie, get your mom some water." And I, with a lump in my throat, would go get the water. Over time I isolated myself. At school I stopped hanging out with my friends. I was embarrassed to invite them to my house. I was afraid they would see how things were. In my own home I was more like a helper than a daughter. One night, lying in my bed, I heard Diane and Paul talking excitedly about how the baby's room was going to look, the colors, the furniture, all of that. They were laughing, they were excited. And I, on the other side of the wall, felt something snap inside me. I could not stay there anymore. With trembling hands I grabbed my cell phone. I did something I had never dared to do. I called my dad. When he answered, I lost my voice for a second. Then I started talking. I told him everything about the clothes, the food, the homework, the silence, the feeling of being a nuisance. I told him that I felt alone, that my stomach hurt from sheer stress, that I never wanted to wake up in that house again. My dad did not interrupt me. I just heard him breathing, and that told me he was still there, that he had not hung up on me. When I finally went quiet, he dropped a sentence that I still feel in my chest. "Pack your backpack," he said with a firm voice I had never heard from him before. "I am picking you up tomorrow." I was about 11 years old. The next day I woke up early, feeling like electricity was running through my body. I already had everything packed from the night before. I took my suitcase down the stairs and heard my mom's voice from the kitchen. "Where are you going, Natalie?" I stood there waiting for a fight, but when I turned around I saw her leaning against the doorframe with a weird smile. A smile that was not out of affection but of relief. "I am going to live with my dad," I said, trying to sound strong, and my mom, as if she were receiving good news, smiled even more. "It is about time," she said, almost happily. "Paul and I are going to need space for the baby." Those words hit me incredibly hard. She did not even try to fake it. She did not even ask me why. At that moment I heard the horn outside. It was my dad. Diane walked with me to the door with that same smile. "Take care, Natalie," she told me, as if she were sending me off on an errand. I got into the car, and before closing the door I looked back. My mom was at the entrance, happy, waving goodbye. It was the most joyful image I had seen of her in years, and it was because I was leaving. My dad's apartment was small in Burbank, nothing luxurious, but it felt like a home. There was peace, there was food in the fridge, there was a voice asking, "How was your day?" without sarcasm, and we did not stay there very long. In the following months I watched my dad build a business as if his pride had been stung. Every week there was something new, A big client, a contract, an expansion. I did not understand everything, but I saw his face. He walked straight again. He smiled genuinely again. Within a year we were looking for a house in one of those neighborhoods where I had never imagined living. We ended up in a huge, modern home with large windows, 3 floors, and a garden that looked straight out of a magazine in Calabasas. My room was bigger than the apartment we used to live in. My dad worked a lot, yes, but when he got home he would look at me and say, "We are making it." And I felt that this was also mine because it was his effort, but it was also his love for me. I fully threw myself into making that house a home. I learned to cook, not like a television chef, but real delicious food that smelled like home. I learned to keep things organized, to coordinate with the lady who helped us with the cleaning. I even took up planting a few things in the garden, tomatoes, herbs, whatever would grow. I transferred to a reputable private school. One of those where they demand a lot and work you hard, but they also open doors for you. It was hard to adapt because I came with wounds, insecurities, and shame. But my dad would tell me, "You can do it. No one here is going to make you feel less than." The years passed quickly. At 18 my dad gave me a surprise that still gives me a nervous laugh when I remember it. He took me to the parking lot, and there was a new SUV, one of those big, beautiful ones. "So you do not have to struggle anymore," he told me, tossing me the keys with a smile. "And while you are at it, you can help me run some errands." I almost cried right then and there, not because of the SUV but because of the gesture, for feeling that someone thought of me with affection. To be honest, I started thinking less about my mom. She never looked for me, never asked about me, and I did not look for her either, nor for my relatives on her side. There were things that still hurt too much. I focused on studying. I graduated from college with honors. On the day of my graduation, standing there in my cap and gown, searching through the crowd, I saw my dad in the front row with his eyes shining with pride. For a moment I forgot to breathe. That was real unconditional love. After the ceremony he pulled me to the side. "I have something for you," he said. With that mischievous boy look he gave me a small box. Inside was a key. "It is for your condominium," he said. "In Los Feliz, well located so you are close to everything. It is your graduation gift." I hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Dad," I told him. Through it all life went on. A few years passed, my job was going well, my dad's business was still going strong, and I already had my routine. Dinners with him once a week, long phone calls talking about everything until one day everything shattered. "Your dad is sick," they told me. The diagnosis dropped like a stone. Advanced cancer. The doctors spoke and I could barely understand isolated words. I only understood the important part. He was seriously ill. From that moment on my world became just one thing, taking care of him. I asked for a leave of absence from work and moved back into his house. I looked for treatments, doctors, second opinions. I read everything I could find. I did what I could and what I did not know I could do. It was a brutal cycle. Good days when he felt encouraged to sit in the garden, and terrible days when he could barely handle the pain or the nausea from the treatments. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, I was helping him into bed and he took my hand. "Natalie," he said softly, "promise me something." I nodded, a lump in my throat. "Promise me that you are going to live your life. Truly, do not get stuck because of me." I wanted to tell him that he was going to get better, to not say that, to not scare me. But we both knew. So I squeezed his hand and said, "I promise, Dad." 2 weeks later he passed away. I was there holding his hand when he took his last breath. I told him how much I loved him, how grateful I was, everything I never wanted to be left unsaid. The following days were a blur. I had to organize the wake, choose flowers, music, notify people about things. It was as if I was on autopilot, as if I were putting together an event for someone else. I was at the funeral home looking at details when my cell phone vibrated. Unknown number. I do not know why I answered. "Hello." There was a short silence, and then I heard a voice that shook my whole body. "Natalie, it is your mom." I almost dropped the phone. After years of not hearing from her, she was calling me right now. "What do you want?" I asked dryly, unable to help it. "I found out about Michael," she said in a softer voice than I remembered. "I am truly very sorry. I want to help you with the arrangements if you will let me." I wanted to hang up, I wanted to tell her to stay out of it, but I was tired, I was broken, and a part of me, a foolish part that still existed, wanted to feel even a crumb of having a mom. All right, I said. You can come. I hung up and was left with an ugly feeling, as if I had opened a door that should have remained closed. Diane arrived at the funeral home, a little while later with my half-brother Connor. Connor was already about 17, tall, lanky, with a face that looked like he did not know what to do with his hands. You could tell he was in high school, one of those kids who are still growing, still figuring out their place in the world. My mom was adjusting him as if he were a doll. She straightened his tie, smoothed his hair, smiled at him. Seeing her like that hurt like a knife. I never had that tenderness. What should I do? Diane asked me. Still distrustful, I put her to work, and to my surprise she handled things well. She talked to the staff, took care of the flowers, answered calls, and welcomed those arriving to offer their condolences. At the service and at the cemetery she stayed close. She touched my arm from time to time for support. It felt incredibly weird, as if she were putting on a mom role that did not fit, but she was there. When everything was over and people left, Diane approached me. Natalie, I know it is not the best time, but I would like us to stay in touch, she said. We can grab coffee someday. I looked at her, not knowing what to say. That woman had made my life difficult for years. She had been happy to see me leave, but she was also technically family, and my dad was no longer here. An aunt told me on the phone that same week, "Look, honey, she is your mom. Just take it easy but do not close the door." And I, overwhelmed by grief, let myself be carried along. Maybe, I said, I will think about it. And against all odds Diane started calling every week. Her voice was full of concern. How are you, my daughter? How are you holding up? Do you need anything? Do you need me to go somewhere with you? At first I gave minimal answers, short sentences. I am fine, I am getting by. Thank you. But as the days passed, when the silence in my house became unbearable, I started feeling grateful to have someone on the other end of the line, even if it was her. The conversations were normal in the beginning. Questions about my job, my condominium, my routine. Then, little by little, the topic changed. And your dad's company? She would ask casually. It must be a heavy burden. He always worked so much. I would dodge the question because the truth was I was just barely understanding what my dad had left me, the business, properties, responsibilities, and something inside me, an alarm I developed as a child, told me, do not say too much. Over time the hints became clearer. Connor is already looking at colleges, she told me one day. Everything is so expensive, Natalie. I do not know how we are going to manage again. Paul had some problems at work. You know, things are tough, sometimes I worry. And just like that. Always returning to money, to how hard they were having it, to how much they had struggled, as if I did not know. Still, Diane slowly softened me with her calls, her tone, playing that mom role that she now remembered to embrace. And in a moment that infuriates me to recall today, I started helping. First it was small things. I paid for a prep course for Connor for his college admissions tests. Then a new laptop for my mom because hers was broken. Once I covered a mortgage payment because their bills piled up and Paul was tight on cash. You are an angel, Natalie, Diane would say. I do not know what we would do without you. And the worst part is I felt a warmth in my chest, as if they were finally giving me a place. I was vulnerable, overwhelmed by grief, and I needed to feel that I still had a family. Meanwhile, I fully immersed myself in my dad's company. I kept the director who had been with him for years. I stayed on as the owner, having the final say in important decisions. It was heavy, but it made me feel close to my dad. Sitting in his office was like listening to him. Months passed and Diane's requests became routine. It was no longer if you can. It was we need it. And more, until one Tuesday in broad daylight I was buried in reports and Diane called. Natalie, beautiful, she started way too sweetly. Look, we have been thinking. We really need a family vacation, a really nice one. We found an awesome package for a trip to Europe, the kind with an agency and everything. My stomach dropped. Mom, I do not know, I said. It would be a gift for Connor, she cut me off. He is almost out of high school and he deserves it. And after everything we have been through, do you not think we deserve a little bit of happiness? Guilt crawled up my neck, and at the same time I felt anger. But before thinking it through, I said yes. I agreed to pay for the trip. They returned and I thought, that is it. No more. But the next day the phone rang again. Now for the important stuff, Diane said, no longer using a sweet voice. We have to set up the college fund for Connor. He wants to go to USC and that does not pay for itself. I need you to get that sorted out right away. Something inside me broke again. No, I said, my voice shaking. It is over now. I am not giving you any more, Mom. There was silence, and when Diane spoke, she was no longer that worried mother. She was the usual one. After everything we have done for you, she snapped coldly. You are an ungrateful brat. How dare you turn your back on your family? A bitter laugh escaped me. One of those with zero humor. Family, I said. The mom who was happy I left. The one who made me feel like a nuisance my whole life. The argument escalated quickly. Diane started throwing words like stones. You are exactly like your father, she said coldly. Selfish. Thank God, I replied without thinking. At least he actually loved me. She hung up. I stood there holding my cell phone, trembling, surrounded by a massive silence. And instead of feeling guilt, I felt relief, as if I had finally taken a weight off my shoulders. Shortly after, a month-long business trip abroad came up. It was important for the company, and I took it as an escape. I needed air, I needed distance. I spent that month focused on work, tired but much calmer. And when I returned, all I wanted was to walk into my condominium, kick off my shoes, and sleep in my bed. I arrived at my building in Los Feliz, still holding my suitcase. It was about 8 o'clock in the evening and I could feel the exhaustion of the whole day. I went up, looked for my keys, and when I put the key in the lock it did not turn. I stopped. I tried again. Nothing. It was a different lock. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knocked softly at first, then louder. They took a second, but they opened. It was a different condominium, not because the walls had changed but because none of my things were there anymore. My furniture was not there. My decor, my things, everything was gone. There were different paintings, another sofa, a different smell. A couple stood there looking at me as if I were the intruder. Excuse me, I said, losing my voice. What? What are you doing in my condominium? The man stood up, confused. Your condominium, he said. We bought this place 2 weeks ago. A woman named Diane sold it to us. I felt the ground fall out from under me. No, that cannot be, I gasped. There must be a mistake. I never sold it. I was out of the country. The woman spoke to me carefully. We have the deed. Everything was done at the notary public. We were surprised by how fast it went too. But everything is in order. Even the building management asked us for a copy of the deed for the change of ownership. I stood there with my suitcase on the floor, unable to process the idea. I apologized as best I could and walked out into the hallway. In the elevator I saw myself in the mirror and I looked like someone else. My first instinct was to go straight to file a police report that very second. But there was something burning inside me even more. I needed to hear it from Diane. I needed her to tell me directly. I sat on the stairs for a moment, trembling, and called her. She answered quickly, as if she had been waiting. Hi, Natalie, she said sweetly. How was your trip? Enough, Mom, I said, my voice sharp as a blade. What did you do with my condominium? There was a pause. And then to my horror, Diane laughed. She laughed as if I were telling her a funny piece of gossip. Oh, Natalie, she said with contempt. If you had shared your money properly, this would not have happened. You brought this on yourself. I froze. You sold it. I asked. How dare you? I swear I am going to report you to the police. So what? She interrupted me, now sounding tough. Are you going to accuse your own mother? You do not have the guts. You always stay quiet. She hung up. I stood there with the phone glued to my ear, listening to nothing, but the confidence with which she spoke ignited something inside me, a fire I did not recognize. Without thinking too much, I ordered an Uber. It was around 8:30 and traffic was heavy. Between stoplights and turns the ride felt eternal. I was watching the city lights go by, feeling like my chest was going to burst. I arrived at Diane and Paul's house in Woodland Hills and knocked on the door as if my life depended on it. Paul opened it, looking utterly confused. "Natalie, what is wrong?" he said. I walked in without asking permission. "Where is my mom?" I asked. "She is not here," he said, still confused. "What is going on?" And there, with a breaking voice, I unloaded everything on him about the condominium, the call, Diane's laugh, the confession. Paul went pale. "That is impossible, Natalie," he murmured. "We do not need your money for Connor's school. I have had savings for that for years." We just stared at each other. And in that moment I realized something that gave me chills. Diane did not ask out of necessity. She asked because she could. Paul started pulling out papers, bank statements, transactions, credit cards. Connor came out of his room looking scared, and Paul just told him, "Go back inside, son, we will talk in a bit." I sat down with Paul in the dining room and we reviewed everything. And what we saw was upsetting. There were personal loans, maxed out credit cards, purchases that made no sense, hidden payments. Diane had been living a completely separate life. And not only that, suddenly a detail appeared that completely broke my heart out of anger. Months before, when my dad had just passed away and I was in pieces, Diane had pressured me with paperwork. She took me to a notary public under the pretext that this way she could help me resolve things while I was devastated. I signed a power of attorney, a broad legal document, without thinking, trusting that for once she was on my side. That power of attorney was the key. And with that document Diane presented herself as my legal representative, signed off on the sale, had the payment routed to an account she controlled, and while I was out of town she also brought in moving trucks. The building's log recorded that the legal representative removed the furniture, and the security guard let her in because she had copies of the paperwork. Paul covered his mouth with his hand. "I had no idea," he said with red eyes. "I swear, Natalie, I did not know anything about this." I believed him. His face was not an act, it was a brutal dose of reality. That night Paul offered to let me stay there, at least to breathe and think. I could not. I felt suffocated in that house. I went to a nearby hotel with my head in knots, but I did not sleep. The next morning, as soon as the sun came up, I made a decision. It was no longer just my sad story, it was a crime. I called 911 for guidance, and once redirected I went to the district attorney's office to file a formal complaint. We opened a case file. There were expert analyses, document reviews, bank statements, records from the notary public. Every step uncovered something else. Diane had not only used the power of attorney to sell my condominium, but she had also taken out hidden loans. She had racked up massive debts and spent money on things Paul could not even imagine. Expensive clothes, spa treatments, hotels, trips, luxury purchases that did not add up. All hidden, all based on lies, all paid for with a mix of credit and what she took from me. Over time the case became gossip and even made it into local news. Nothing out of a movie, but enough for people who did not even know me to share their opinions. I hated the exposure, but deep down a part of me felt relieved to watch the persona Diane had invented her whole life crumble. The legal process was grueling, cold, and long. Months went by, hearings, paperwork, back and forth, but the day finally came when she was found guilty. Fraud, forgery, and breach of trust. When I heard the sentence my legs shook, not from joy but from the certainty that this finally had consequences. Restitution for the damages regarding the condominium was also ordered. Paul was basically in shock through it all. The day after the sentencing he called me. "Natalie," he said with a raspy voice, "I am going to file for divorce and seek full custody of Connor. After this I cannot let her manipulate him the way she manipulated all of us." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Paul had been a victim too. And Connor, needless to say. Eventually the restitution was resolved. I did not want to go back to that condominium. I felt it was already tainted by everything. I bought a smaller house in a quiet suburb in Santa Clarita to start from scratch. A place where no one knew my story, where there were no echoes. I threw myself entirely into my dad's business, this time truly making it my own path. I wanted to honor him by working hard, growing what he had built. It was not easy. But for the first time in my life I felt I was standing on my own 2 feet without asking for permission, without enduring mistreatment just to earn love. Connor and I are still in touch. He got into college and is studying engineering with Paul's support. Our relationship is complicated, sometimes sad, because it carries the shadow of everything that happened, but it is also an opportunity. He was never to blame for anything, and I do not want to repeat my mom's abandonment. I have not heard anything from Diane since then. I do not know if she has tried to look for me, and if I am being honest, I do not want to know. That chapter of my life is finally closed. Comment. I really sat with this story for a while, and it reminded me how crucial it is to value ourselves first. Setting healthy boundaries has saved me more times than I can count, and I hope it encourages you to do the same. You are allowed to protect your peace, even if it disappoints other people. True healing begins when we stop trying to earn love that should be given freely. I've learned that real kindness never comes with strings attached or hidden expectations. Taking responsibility for your own happiness is one of the most powerful choices you can make. Sometimes walking away isn't giving up, it's choosing yourself. Take time to reflect on the relationships in your life and ask yourself if they lift you up or weigh you down. You deserve to be surrounded by people who genuinely care about your well-being. Remember, your self-respect is worth more than any approval you might lose by saying no. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.